general atmosphere in town too, so.
Yeah, the numbers are looking better, so that's always nice to see. That brings us to item 33, which is a presentation on the pavement management plan. City Engineer Lance Meyer.
Mr. President, members of the council, before I get started, I broke our drawer. There, we got it. I wanted to take this time to thank one of our staff members. This is Dave Wickey's last meeting with us as Assistant City Engineer. He has recently been hired by the City of Williston to be their new city engineer. So congratulations to him. That's quite the promotion. And we'll be missing him here at the city. We have several major engineering positions open now. So if you know someone that wants to be an assistant city engineer, a traffic engineer, or project manager, send them my way. With that, pavement management. So I'll try to make this as interesting as I can. I can guarantee it'll be more interesting than CDBG. No doubt about that. So some things to talk about today. So first, I think we need to have a common understanding of pavements and how they work. I'm sure you all understand what a pavement is, but I'll go in a little detail. What is pavement management? How do we do those things? What's our current financing with our current programs? How do those work? Some project history regarding this project and how that came to be our city's current pavement condition. Some financial planning for the future on some options for us, and then finally some future implementation steps. So a pavement, it's any type of surface that transfers a vehicle load to the ground. It can be made from just about anything, gravel, asphalt, concrete, brick, you name it, as long as it transfers that load. And different materials will have different engineering properties that we have to be aware of. Generally speaking, in Minot, we have two types of pavements. You have flexible pavements, asphalt pavements, and rigid, which is concrete. Each is built a little bit differently. Think of flexible pavements as a layer cake. So each layer underneath supports the previous layer. So the asphalt is supported by the gravel, which is then supported by the underlying soil. Concrete's completely different. All the strength is in the concrete itself. The gravel underneath is essentially a drainage layer and a hard surface to lay the concrete on. The way that you transfer those loads to the ground is also very important. On a flexible pavement, you have more of a point load. So that's why those underlying layers become more and more important. You need that additional support to transfer that load. On a rigid pavement, it's not so much from tire to ground, it's more from panel to panel. And that's why you have a more distributed load over that surface instead of a point. So now that we all know what pavements are, the sad truth is no matter how well we design or build them, they're going to fail. Like any piece of infrastructure, at some point it just ends out of useful life and we have to do something about it. Pavement distress falls into two main categories. You have weathering failure. This is predominantly what we see in this part of the country. We have extreme cold and we have extreme heat. And if you don't seal those pavements well enough, they just start to ravel apart, especially on the asphalt side. They get dry, if you can believe that, and then eventually the asphalt breaks down and they want to turn back into gravel. Load failure is the opposite. That's when a lot of times the underlying soils can't support the traffic loading. So you'll see the pavement start to rut, then they'll crack, and then they'll develop potholes, and then you end up with something like that's on the screen. So different pavement sections are designed different to withstand these different conditions. So what's pavement management? Well, that's the approach that we take to forecast maintenance and rehabilitation. M&R, you'll hear me say that a lot today, so that's what that means. And then we have to optimize and prioritize our available funding. Unfortunately, no city, I don't care where you're at, has enough funding to take care of their roads at will. So they have to program those improvements over a period of time and then have a strategy for how you deal with that. With proper pavement management, we can delay the time that it takes to have to replace these pavements. I showed you this graph before. This just goes to the value of doing some of that maintenance work up front rather than delaying those costs. Delayed pavement maintenance, just like in your car, if you don't change the oil, you're going to have engine problems. If you take good care of your vehicle, your cost of ownership is less. It's no different in infrastructure with streets or water mains or you name it. These costs aren't Minot's costs, but I showed you something that was similar. Our chip seal costs are about $4 a square yard versus an overlay, which is approximately 3 times that. So the more you do to the pavement, the more it's going to cost. So let's talk a little bit about our funding background and traditionally how we've funded these programs. We have 2 primary programs. We have the Public Works Street Maintenance Budget, which is funded by levy. So those are direct taxes that go into street maintenance. We also have our Street Improvement Program, which until 2011 was a general tax levy program. We dedicated anywhere from about 10 to 15 mills. It kind of depended on the year. I have some data on that I'll show you later, but then in about 2011, we switched over to funding street maintenance exclusively with sales tax. And last year, or 2018 budget, that's how our program was funded. Now in 2019, we've made a few changes to that. So breaking down these budgets a little bit, in the current Public Works maintenance budget, in the streets and alleys line item, you have just over $1 million total in that account. $500,000 of that goes into the work that Dan and the street department need to do. So that's patching roadways with their patch crew, regraveling alleys, the expensive blading, and some other things that they need to maintain streets. The other $500,000 is dedicated to one of the projects that my department manages, our street patching program. So we bid that out every year. We have to charge ourselves the engineering services, so that's a revenue for my department. We take 12% off of that budget, and then it's counted as revenue. $75,000 is then dedicated to shared use path maintenance, so we'll go and patch or fog or overlay paths around the city. Our street improvement program, that's one of the programs that my department manages. Our annual budget is $2.9 million, and like I said, that's paid with sales tax dollars. Again, 12% of that is subtracted from the overall budget, transferred into the department as revenue, and then we have about $2.5 million to use between the street seal project and the street improvement project. The difference being between the 2 programs, your street seal that's the chip seal that's been going around town right now. We do patching and crack sealing with that. Street improvement is the more detailed sort of thing where we'll mill and overlay or we do cement stabilization. Those are the major street rehabilitation projects. Kind of a side set of this, a new arterial construction or reconstruction. These are typically federal projects that we get federal funding for on a case-by-case basis. We'll program that into the city's CIP through the state of North Dakota, through the DOT. And then we'll sell bonds for those projects for our cost share, and then that's paid back by typically levy funds. So as an example, the reconstruction on Burdick that we did last year, that was a state-funded DOT project, 90%, and then the city's 10% cost share is paid back with highway bonds or some other funding source if we have it. Historically, if we go back to 2004, that's the last budget that I have that's on file, you can look at our maintenance history of trying to fund street repairs. The green line is the Public Works Street Maintenance Budget. The blue line is our street improvement program. So, the street improvements hovered about $1 million. I think they moved that mill levy amount up by, trying to factor what the values were and keep it around $1 million. Public Works' budget was about $250,000. It held like that forever. And then when I became city engineer in 2011, and then when Dan became director of public works in 2012, we both realized that these funding levels are not sustainable. Something has to change, and every year we try to increase those budgets to try to catch up. And we are pretty successful in doing that. However, we have other funding priorities that we need to be cognizant of around the city, and so we've had to level those off some. The spike that you see in the street improvement program in the 2019 budget, that's us trying to catch up again by spending another $1 million in some sales tax and tax levy to go into ramping up that program. what really did us in here is about 2008. If you all remember back then, that's when oil spiked. And I was living in the Twin Cities at the time, and I was paying like $4.20 a gallon for gas. I don't know what it was here, but it was extremely expensive. The price of asphalt went through the roof, and our budgets never changed. And so we went from sealing, probably about a sixth or seventh of the city every year to something like, about 1/10. And that's where we really started to lose ground. Our pavement condition index, even though we didn't have it evaluated back then, that's when it probably started to nosedive, and that's where we see ourselves and right now as an issue. So knowing that funding alone can't solve all these issues, what can we do besides the dollars to try to help ourselves out? One of the first things that I did when I moved back home is I took a look at our pavement section, and it was 3.5 inches of asphalt on 6 inches of gravel. For reference, when we pave or rebuild a shared use path for bicycles, our section is 3 inches of asphalt on 6 inches of gravel. So on our city street, which has to handle garbage trucks and school buses and passenger cars, we thought that 1/2 inch of asphalt was gonna take it, and it didn't. So we re-engineered that. We have 3.5 inches of asphalt now on 10 inches of gravel, with geotextile fabric and a much improved subgrade specification that helps us bridge some of those soft soils that we have. We wanted to go thicker, but of course we have to balance that with some cost to development. So that might be something we should look at in the future. From the 2012 budget on, we've been able to adjust our street improvement and street maintenance fundings to the point where we could tolerate, and you've seen that on that line graph. We've enacted a new engineering policy where arterial roads, so new construction with higher ADTs, or average daily traffic, will be constructed with concrete pavement. We've calculated that in the long run, when you look at street maintenance costs on arterial roadways, the city's money ahead when you take back or calculate back what the total cost of maintenance is to do concrete. Typical city street, with our soils, we're just fine doing asphalt. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. On the arterials, it's worth a second look, and generally speaking, concrete's gonna come out ahead on those. Going forward, our streets improvement selection will be driven by our asset management data, not ad hoc. Before, we just didn't have the data to make the decisions we needed. You try to drive as much of the network as you can. You look at it empirically, but now with the data that we have, we can make some better decisions. Several years ago, back in 2010, we took the initiative to try to start some sort of pavement management. We used the PACER method, which is a more simplistic method of doing street condition assessments. It's like a 1 through 5 scale. We kind of lucked out by doing that ahead, because after the flood, we were able to present this data to FEMA and show them, here was the conditions of our streets before, here they are after. FEMA accepted that, and because of that, we got millions of dollars in street improvements to try to repair those. We're also able to use that data, and a lot of credit goes to Mr. Jonason, because after the flood, we were able to go through the valley and do a maintenance overlay or a chip seal on every single one of our flooded streets. So that significantly helped our backlog. I think that was somewhere around $9 or $10 million that we put into the valley. So good decisions there. The data collection for this, back before the city had all of that growth, that took one person about 6 months to drive around every street that we had in town and do that data collection. So that was a huge amount of time for us, and we just weren't able to get back to it. As everyone knows, with flood recovery and the development we had, there was no way we could dedicate staff to do an effort like that again. Therefore, last year I asked that we fund a full-scale study to get this data that we needed. Council agreed. They drove our streets last year in October and worked all winter on all the GIS databases and programming and analysis. So that's basically where we're at today. So let's talk some statistics. The city of Minot has 405 streets, and each one of those streets is then broken down into sections we call blocks. So from 24th Street, from 2nd Avenue to 4th Avenue, that's a block. And then we're able to categorize that in our systems. We have 249 paved centerline miles. Now, we've seen some graphics that we've come up with before that says we had 290 miles of center lines. Well, some of those aren't improved. Those are platted right-of-ways, but they're not all the way built. All of the streets that are paved, either with gravel, asphalt, concrete, those are all categorized, and we have 249 centerline miles. 532 lane miles, so your typical residential street has 2 lanes. Broadway has 5, Burdick has 4. Each segment of that, each lane has to be maintained. So the real important number here is 532. That's about the distance from Minot to a little past Minneapolis. And we have 42.1 million square feet of pavement that we are responsible to maintain. Let's break that down a little bit further. So we have a hierarchy of roadways, and you've heard me talk about this before. We rank them from principal arterial like Broadway and Burdick all the way down to your local streets. Minor arterials, think of 16th Street, 37th Avenue. They're designed to carry a significant amount of traffic from one principal arterial to the other, and then the hierarchy goes down and down. So we break those down by percentages, the number of sections, to help us understand exactly what our maintenance priorities need to be. Obviously, we want to put more dollars towards our arterial network than our locals, just because of the amount of traffic that goes around. We are predominantly an asphalt community, and again, there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. We have 3 asphalt paving companies in town. Our soils are not like the Red River Valley, so we don't have to worry about doing everything in concrete. We have decent ground. Groundwater is usually our enemy, like most pavements, so we have to deal with that. But most of our pavements are in asphalt. So how they analyze these, every street within the city was driven, and they use highly sophisticated survey equipment. Basically, it's a van that has a bunch of equipment in it that does all the different surveys and pavement conditions and pictures and et cetera. Arterial streets were driven in 2 directions, and so they copied segments from each side. The local streets were only driven in one direction. 100% of the pavement is surveyed, and it's surveyed in 20-foot frames, and then they take a 1/3 sample rate of each one of those frames. And that follows the pavement condition standards as designated by ASTM. So if we want to sample every pavement section, we'll be highly accurate, but our costs will be immense. So by doing this, we still get a high quality level of data, but we don't have to pay the high cost of doing all that analysis. It gives us what we need for a global picture. So we picked several pavement condition categories from good to very poor. It's a 0 to 100 scale. You can pick any ranges you want. There's no magic about that. So for instance, Bismarck, they have good, satisfactory, poor. I wanted to have some more strata in there so that knowing that our funding is tight, we have a little more knowledge on where some of these dollars should be spent. This next slide is going to surprise you a little bit, so I'm going to kind of walk you through why it is how it is. 40% of our street pavement network is in good condition. Well, 35% of it's satisfactory, so 75% of our network is in good or satisfactory condition. I know the first question you're going to ask me is, well, Lance, the most phone calls I get as an alderman are about street maintenance. How can you tell me that 75% of our network's in good condition? What it mainly comes down to is some of the issues that we have with all the new streets that we built or reconstructed here in the last several years. All the money we put into downtown, the flood recovery money that Dan had used, the new subdivisions that have come online, all that new mileage of street that's come online, most of it goes into that good category. When you look at the weighting of how we do these, you provide more weight to your arterial network. Well, our arterial network, a lot of it is either new or we've dedicated a lot of funding towards those networks because they carry the most amount of traffic. So we have PCIs in the 80s for most of our arterial network. The local streets, which most of us live on, are down in the 70s. And so we have some focus areas that we need to eventually work through, and that's where a lot of our backlog is coming from. Then we have some more charts that just break down, by surface type, by percentage of area, those sort of things. You know, mainly our concrete streets are in really good shape because a lot of them are frankly, they're new. You know, it just takes longer to deteriorate those roadways so they stay in a little better shape longer. Looking at how our pavements are distressing, you go back to those pictures that I showed, load-related versus the climate or the weathering. Most of our distresses that we're seeing through this analysis are weather-related. So what's that mean? Well, it means we're not sealing our streets fast enough. And you heard Tom talk about it yesterday. You know, we're on about a 17-year cycle. We just reconstructed Hiawatha Street 2 weeks ago. That street had never been sealed because the condition was never such that we could seal it. We just had a lot of issues there, so we just finally had to pull the plug, I guess, and rebuild it. And so some of these issues that we're having with the major work is taking dollars away from our street sealing. And you look before, we had that $2.5 million, and we have to dedicate dollars to each program. And typically our street improvement takes so many dollars away from our street seals that we just can't keep up. And then there's some other load-related things, or not load, but just other random things that happen with some of our streets that don't really fall into those categories, small percentage. So the good news, 75% of our pavement is in a good or satisfactory condition. Our overall pavement condition index is about a 79. Our street arterial network is generally well maintained. Some of the bad news are local streets, where most of our residents live on, are in tough shape. We need to dedicate some funding to rehabilitate those. On average, and this is the important part, we're losing about 2 pavement condition index points per year. And that's going to get important as I break down this data a little bit further about what that means. And again, like I mentioned, the majority of our distress is weather-related, lack of sealing. We have a lot of ride quality issues in Minot, and I think this is where we're having a lot of our complaints. It's not. It might be the case where the pavement is just fine. Patch the potholes, we've sealed the cracks, but you know, over time, what ends up happening is you patch and you patch and you patch. And when you go over each one of those patches, you hit a bump, and then you hit another bump. And so the feeling from the citizens is, well, this is a really rough road, therefore it probably needs to be replaced. But in reality, the pavement might be okay, but the ride condition is horrible. And you can kind of see by this map here, it's a little bit hard to see, but I'll show you some tools later that'll help us with that. There's not a lot of green on this map. Yellow is a marginal condition and red is rough, so you can see that a lot of our network, it's rough or marginal when it comes to ride quality, but the actual pavement condition might be satisfactory or okay. Mill and overlays are typically what's needed to try to correct this. You can do some leveling when you do patching, but you're still probably not gonna to get it all the way there where you need to have a smooth quality ride. But mill and overlays are significantly more expensive than chip seals. So that'll be a decision point someday we'll have to work through is we can dedicate this amount of dollars. We might not be able to take care of all the ride quality issues, but we'll have well-maintained streets that will last a long time. So as part of what we did with this project, we wanted to look at different funding scenarios. What if we applied this amount of funding here? What does that do to our overall pavement condition index? So the scenarios that we went through, we wanted to evaluate what's the effect of our current $3 million budget? What does that give us in 5 years? What's the required budget to maintain a PCI 77? And you might say, well, Lance, I thought you said our PCI was a 79. Well, it was in 18, but because we're losing about 2 points a year at the beginning of 19, we'll be down at a 77. What's the effect of performing no major or global work? So that's the budget scenario where we say, hey, we can't afford to maintain streets. We're just going to patch using that $400,000 budget, and streets will happen, whatever happens, happens. And then what's the required budget to eliminate all of the major backlog, the maintenance and rehabilitation backlog in 5 years? And then what's our effect of our proposed budget? So we're going to try to ramp that up over the next several years. So next year is $4 million, and we want to go to 5, then 6, then 7. What is the effect of doing something like that? Like any good engineer, you got to make some assumptions. So we had to assume that in 2019, we'll start at a 77 for PCI. We set our critical PCI at 75. So if you go back to that pavement deterioration has kind of an S-curve in it. Our critical PCI, that's the number that when you hit that, that's when you start to have the rapid decline. So it's almost like the point of no return. You need to do something quickly or you're going to lose that street in a matter of years. We're starting this year at a PCI of 77. So that means that globally, some streets are better than others. It's kind of like the average. Globally, we're starting to get really close to that point of no return. So this is a problem that we need to be working on quickly, otherwise it's just going to start to snowball on us. The software, when it looks at this, it prioritizes our street funding program. Whatever number we put in here, it goes through an analysis and says, okay, first, we're going to do all the safety patching that we have to do. We'll start with that. Then we're going to go to more of the global patching, which we do citywide. Then once that's taken care of, then it looks at the street sealing program, and then the major works, or our mill and overlays that are above a 75, and then the ones that are below a 75. And then it goes even further and prioritizes projects by rank. So that's where we say we want to do the minor arterials and the collectors and the local roads last. And then finally, proximity to critical PCI. So the software is going to want to tend to improve roadways that are closer to 75 than the ones that are farther away. And the theory there is, in pavement management, do not ever fix your worst first, because that's where you'll have the largest drain on your budget. So you want to fix the ones that are above that 75 first, the ones that are farther down the road, let them go. Or find a different way to fund those. And that's a conversation we'll have in the future. Cost for budgeting, we're taking from our current bid projects, so these aren't assumptions, these are actual numbers that we're getting from our paving contractors. We increase our unit costs as the PCI decreases, which makes sense. Things are going to cost more the worse they are. And unit costs are going to be higher for our arterials due to the added work that you typically have to do for something like that. So more traffic control, more general conditions, that kind of thing. And then 3% inflation was used in all of our analysis. So here's the breakdown. And I'll walk you through what some of this stuff means. It's a pretty important chart. So in the first, and we go by scenarios, so our base scenario is our current budget at $3 million a year. That's the top line. So in 5 years' time, so it's a 5-year analysis period, we're going to spend about $14.8 million in our funding. Then we have the component called backlog. So if we fund our streets at this level, we'll accumulate backlog or work that isn't getting done on the streets as they deteriorate. And that is this number, about $50 million over that 5-year period. You add these two numbers together to get our total 5-year cost. So this is our baseline program. If you annualize that payment cost, or that cost of work over the 5-year period, it's about $13 million. And that leaves us with a PCI of 75.4. So if we wanted to maintain our current PCI, how much funding would that take? The program tells us we need about $6 million a year to maintain the exact same level of service that we have today. So going through the math like I did before, we're going to spend almost $30 million in program funds. Our backlog will reduce from 50 to 32 million. We have a total 5-year cost of about 62, which is a cost differential of 2.9, and that's taking this number minus this number. And then we have our annualized cost, and then what our resulting PCI will be at the end of that 5-year period. If we wanted to get out of the pavement maintenance business and just use patching, that's that $400,000. That'll cost us $2 million. Our major backlog goes through the roof to $77 million. Our annualized cost is 15.9, and our pavement index is not good, so we'll hopefully leave that one alone. If we wanted to eliminate our backlog at $11.6 million a year, that's what it would take over a 5-year period. We'd invest about $57 million. We'd get rid of that major backlog category. So our total 5-year cost obviously would go down. Our annualized cost is about $11.4 million if you take it all the way back and spread it over 5. And then your pavement condition index at the end is 89. Do this exact same scenario if we ramp up the budget over the next 5 years. So you'd have your input cost there. Result in a PCI of about 78.5, which is below our current costs. And you might say, well, why aren't we having more in effect with this funding scenario where we're significantly increasing the program funding? Well, again, it's all about time. So however many years that we have under that 5.9 million or that we need for the to maintain our current pavement condition, we're losing ground. So if we would ramp up to 5.9 million, then increase, then we'd have a higher PCI at the end of that 5-year period. Everyone follow me on some of that? So the time value here is what really gets us on some of these funding scenarios. Graphically, here's what that looks like. The graph on the left shows our budget scenarios and then where they would have a resultant PCI value after that 5-year period. Obviously, the eliminate backlog is going to get us our highest resultant PCI. The doing nothing or the no major work is the lowest at just below 70. Graph on the right shows the backlog with the different scenarios and how that results. So in summary, with the financial planning, obviously the eliminating the backlog scenario in 5 years results in the lowest annualized costs. We need a budget of $5.9 million per year to maintain the pavement conditions that we have today. Anything less, and our pavement conditions will start to fall. Our proposed budget of ramping up street maintenance over the next 5 years will have an impact. It will increase our pavement condition index, but not to the level of ramping up the street funding today just because of that lost time. So here's some steps moving forward, how we're going to work through this in the wintertime. We're further going to review and prioritize our street improvement projects. Like we do every fall and winter, this time we'll have a better set of data to do that. We'll review our current specifications, which we have ongoing right now. We'll probably come at some point to make some recommendations on changing that, maybe thickening that section a little bit, changing our pavement mixes a little bit just to give us some more time that we can stretch those pavement lives out a little bit. We're going to take a look at some other communities' pavement management programs and see if they have some potential solutions. We're all in the same boat together. Our pavements are no different than Bismarck's and Fargo's. They're all going down. They have different ways of solving those issues. We'll talk to them and see if we can compare notes. In fact, I'm setting up at a conference this fall a roundtable with the 4 city engineers in the large cities to talk collectively as a group about this same sort of issue to see if there's some potential issues and programs that other cities can utilize. So we might be doing something that Bismarck's not and vice versa, and we'll try to take that knowledge back home. We'll be bringing to you some recommendations probably this winter, likely in the February timeframe, on what we think are some viable options. And we'll have to have a discussion at some point about how do we want to fund this program? What are some expectations or levels of service so that when we start putting together the 2020 budget and beyond, we'll have some direction and some program funding goals that we can work towards together. One thing I wanted to show briefly is, you've helped us invest in our GIS, and we've been utilizing these tools to help us make decisions. We looked at the fire station stuff before. We've been trying to put construction maps up there so our residents can click on their street and get the latest information on what's going on. We've done the same thing with our pavement condition indexes. So if we look at our map, we're now able to put these pavement conditions on GIS. We can click on the different layers. We can tell the rank of the roadway, how many lanes, what the surface type is, what the pavement condition index is. And why this is important is because when we start doing some analysis on this data, we can start to filter it. And before, if you can imagine, with over 2,600 individual blocks of pavement, that task, doing it by hand or by drive, is almost impossible. Now with the power of GIS, I can ask, I want to know the pavement condition of my minor arterials, and I want to know all the ones that are in poor condition. And by filtering this data, the ones that are in that condition that are a minor arterial now show up on our GIS with the click of a mouse. And then I can go and I can get a detailed look at where these are at. I can export that data that we have in our GIS databases, and I can start to do quick analysis as far as length, cost, width, those sort of things from our numbers. So when we try to do this on the fly, if you say, well, you know, how much would it take to reconstruct Burdick from here to here, we can start to do those quick analysis pretty quick. One thing I did want to show, when I talked about that roughness coefficient, it was a little bit hard to see on the other map. I'm going to turn this filter off. Here's what it looks like a little up close. Like I mentioned before, there's not a lot of green on this map. A lot of yellow, a lot of red. Those are rough roads. So, sorry. These are some issues that we'll have to look at in the future, and we'll come with some recommendations on how we want to address those. Mr. President, members of the council, that's my presentation. I'd be happy to try to answer any questions you may have.
Okay.
Hopefully everyone's still awake.
Thanks. I guess my comment would be the technology is certainly impressive, and the analysis is well done. So I remember very well approving the study, and so now we have results of that we can use, and so I commend you for getting on this, because clearly transportation is important, streets are important. As we go forward, if things are falling apart and we don't know what to do about it, or where to do it, or where the money should be best spent, that's a challenge. So kudos on the approach, certainly. Any other questions or comments from council members? Alderman Wolski.
President Johnson, thank you. Lance, thank you very much. I think, as you mentioned, this is an issue that I think we all take calls and comments on. So presenting this picture to the community, I think, is extremely valuable. In terms of the assessment that we got last year, what's your sense of how often we're going to need to repeat that process to get a picture of how we're doing against this problem? Is that in every 5 years? And when we do get to that process, are we making the full investment that we did a year ago, or have we accomplished some tasks that save us a little money next time around?
So, Mr. President, Alderman Wolski, the way that this contract was set up, it cost us about $100,000 to do this study. The actual pavement data collection was about $45,000 for our entire network. The other cost was writing the report, which is $5,000–$10,000, but it was building all of our GIS databases. So we made an investment in building these databases, so now we have all of this information that we can use in our future asset management plans, and as new roadways come online or reconstruct existing roadways, our staff can update that GIS database fairly easily. It's something that our GIS coordinator does every day. So from that standpoint, in the future, if we wanted to reassess our roadway network, likely 5 years would be a good time to do that. That'd be at the end of the program, so we'd be able to evaluate in that 5-year stretch how we've done. And of course, it's all dependent on funding and whatnot, but that would be my approach. What we would like to do internally as staff is take sections of the city and do our own analysis to try to keep the information up to date as much as we can. Obviously, we don't have the staff to do the entire city like we did back in 2010, but if we can take sections of it over a 5-year period and try to get that data updated, we'd be in pretty good shape.
Alderman Walski, do you have a
Yeah,
follow-on?
President Johnson, just a couple comments here, and I think much more for the council and the community than for Lance. Once again, Lance, I really appreciate having this information. I think the thing we all have to acknowledge inside of this report is that maintaining our roads costs a lot of money. And I think we're all hearing the concerns about increasing property taxes. The conversation we've been having about no more outward expansion and attempting to redevelop more in the interior part of town and redevelop our existing lots that may not be built out yet. I call attention to all of that because I think we have clear evidence in front of us that conversation is becoming more and more and critically important. One of the ways we get control of our maintenance costs is to stop building more things that we have to maintain. And so, I think as everybody in town looks at, what they want to do and where we want to go, I think in particular, we have to be very conscious of the fact that no more roads for a little while. I would also, invite some different thinking that maybe hasn't crossed our consciousness yet, but maybe our roads are too big or too wide. We can control speed, we can control safety, probably by making smaller roads too. We can also save costs on smaller roads. So I think there might be some standard thinking that might need to be challenged a little bit as we take some of this on. I've caught headlines in the last, 6 months to a year of communities that are in some cases returning their paved roads to gravel. I don't think we're at that case here in Minot yet, but that's the infrastructure challenge that exists in some communities out there. And so I think as we take up the challenge of solving this problem and improving our roads to the condition that I think the citizens expect and we all want to have, those are pieces that are worth bearing in mind, I guess. So I just wanted to share those thoughts.
Alderman Potter, you.
I also wanted to share some thoughts, since we probably won't be looking at this again at the council meeting. I just want to get some things on the record. And I have 3 major thoughts to share. The first thought is that I sure wish our city manager, Tom, our finance director, Dave, and our mayor, Sean, were here to listen to this and to hear this presentation and the comments that I think Alderman Walski may now be making. I think this is an exemplary kind of presentation. The second set of comments is that I found your presentation, Lance, very, very informative. Now, I realize I have a master's degree in science and stuff like that, and other people may not get as excited and enthused, but this really made a big difference for me in terms of a policymaker, decision maker, and certainly as a scientist, it get really, really neat. We're getting exactly, I think, the kind of information that we should be getting in making decisions and setting priorities as a council. And I particularly liked your comment that, quote, you look at it empirically, close quote, in terms of making decisions and figuring out where to allocate our money rather than doing it on an ad hoc, subjective basis. We look at the numbers and then we adjust it in terms of our values and things like that. The final comment I'd like to make is that it's really good to see the city staff being much more realistic about our funding needs and bringing these needs in terms of road maintenance and repair to the attention of the public, to the attention of the council, and to the attention of the community in general. As we know, one of the greatest challenges in American local government is being realistic about infrastructure and maintenance. And I think the first step in doing something about the tremendous national problem we have is being open with people about what this stuff costs and how important it is. So I want to just compliment you and the others involved in your presentation as to the quality and I think for me the tremendous value of having something like this. So thanks.
Alderman Straight.
Thank you, Chairman Janser. Thanks, Lance. I guess my one concern with the data, and it makes sense that we're addressing the new roads first for repairs. I understand that. It concerns me a little bit the folks that live probably in some of the older areas of town that have maybe a little more free time to call us, voice their concerns. We have to balance that out in terms of repairs and be mindful of the kind of the optics. I think we understand it because we get a wealth of information to help disseminate to the public. But moving forward, as we look at repairs, let's be mindful of that as well, because some of the folks that are probably going to feel any possible tax increase the most are going to be the ones that are going to call us and will want to see a responsive city staff when it comes time for some of the repairs. And it's on all of us, but I look at you because I sat down with you, I guess, a year ago in your office, and we talked about some of these things. And I like that we're forward thinking, but I know that people that are building really nice homes that are going to turn around and get road repair and maintenance immediately